This is Smilodon, or more famously known as the Saber-tooth tiger. It leaps onto the back of some totally helpless animal, sinks its massive teeth deep into the prey's spine, and instantly takes it down. It's like a tiger, but with two ridiculously oversized teeth shoved into its upper jaw. But if you actually look at the fossil record and the biomechanics of this animal, basically everything about this is completely wrong. They didn't sprint, they didn't jump on things, they didn't stab prey in the back, and those giant teeth? They would actually break if they tried to sink it into an animal thrashing around. We have fundamentally misunderstood what this animal was, how it hunted, and how it survived. And to understand why we have this so wrong, we have to start by looking at the biggest misconception of all: the name itself. The name Sabertooth tiger is actually also a complete lie. If you look at the evolutionary tree of a Smilodon, they have absolutely zero relation to modern tigers. They aren't even related to lions, leopards, or jaguars either. In fact, they split off from the ancestors of modern cats tens of millions of years ago, forming their own completely distinct branch known as the Machaerodontinae. This is a really important distinction to make, because when we call them tigers, we automatically assume they acted like tigers. We assume they had the same sleek bodies, the same hunting tactics, and the same physical limitations. But because they belong to a totally separate branch of evolution, they don't have to follow the rules of modern felines. They were solving the problem of hunting in a completely different way. So, if they aren't tigers, what exactly are we dealing with? Well, for starters, they were chunky. When people think of a Smilodon, they usually picture the North American version, known as Smilodon fatalis. This is the one whose bones we constantly pull out of the La Prairie tar pits in California. And to be fair, fatalis was big. It was roughly the size of a modern African lion, weighing in around 400 to 600 pounds. But fatalis was only the middle child. If you travel further south into prehistoric South America, you run into its much larger cousin, Smilodon populator. This thing was an absolute monster. While a modern Siberian tiger, the largest living cat today, maxes out at around 600 pounds, Smilodon populator easily reached up to 900 pounds. Some estimates even put the largest males closer to 1,000 pounds. We're talking about a predator so heavy that it completely dwarfs any feline alive today. Their shoulders were broad and their chests were huge. But getting to 900 pounds creates a pretty obvious physical problem. You can't exactly run very fast when you're carrying that much weight. And when your food actively wants to run away from you, that's a bit of an issue. A modern cheetah or lion has long, thin leg bones and a highly flexible spine. Their entire anatomy is basically just one giant spring, allowing them to cover a ton of ground really quickly. But the skeleton of a Smilodon? It's completely stiff. Their bones were ridiculously thick. Their front legs were heavily reinforced, and their spine was stiff and rigid. They had essentially traded all of their speed and agility for pure brute strength. If you tried to make a Smilodon sprint after a deer, it would probably look incredibly awkward, and it would gas out almost immediately. They'd take about 5 steps and just be like, okay, I need a break. Biomechanically, they were built much more like a modern grizzly bear than a cat. Which brings up an obvious question. If you're a 900-pound predator that literally cannot run, how do you actually catch anything? The reason Smilodon gave up the ability to sprint is simply because they don't need to. During the Pliocene epoch, the Americas were completely overrun by megafauna. We're talking about literal giants. There were giant ground sloths that stood at 10 feet tall. There were prehistoric bison that weighed over a ton. There were even juvenile mammoths and mastodons wandering around. If your entire diet consists of animals that are the size of cars, being able to run fast is completely useless. You aren't going to win by chasing them down. You have to physically overpower them. The Smilodon's bear-like build was a direct adaptation to its environment. They needed massive front arms so they could grapple with giants, drag them to the ground, and hold them there by pure force. But overpowering a thrashing giant brings us to a glaring flaw in the Smilodon's design, and it has to do with the one thing they're most famous for. The canine teeth of a Smilodon could grow up to 11 inches long, and they look like, well, this, which is obviously incredibly intimidating. But structurally, they were actually pretty fragile. A modern lion has teeth that were round and thick like a cone, but a Smilodon's teeth were flattened side to side. They had an oval cross-section, kind of like the blade of a knife. This shape made them incredibly sharp and perfect for slicing through soft flesh. But if those teeth hit a solid object, like a bone, from the side, they'd snap right off. And this creates a huge problem. If you jump on the back of a panicked ground sloth and just blindly sink your teeth in, you're going to hit bone. And if you hit bone, your teeth snap and you starve, which is obviously highly unideal. So you have a weapon that breaks if you use it wrong. But before you can even worry about hitting a bone, there's a much more basic issue here. How do you even fit something in your mouth when your own teeth are in the way? If you have 11-inch teeth permanently hanging out of your upper jaw, opening your mouth to take a bite of something just becomes complicated. A modern lion can open its jaws to an angle of about 65 degrees. There's plenty of room to grab a zebra by the neck and suffocate it. But if a Smilodon only opened its mouth 65 degrees, the tips of its giant teeth would still be blocking the entrance to its own throat. It wouldn't even be able to get its mouth around a piece of meat. So their skulls had to be completely different. A Smilodon was capable of dropping its lower jaw to a staggering 120 degrees. If you saw this happen in real life, it would look like the animal's jaw was literally unhinging. Yeah, it looks deeply unnatural. It had to open its mouth so unbelievably wide just to clear the length of its own weapons, exposing the entire throat of whatever it was about to bite. Okay, so they can open their mouth wide enough to actually use the teeth. But how do you safely bite a thrashing giant without snapping those fragile teeth in half? This is where the bear-like arms and fragile teeth finally come together to make sense. Jumping on prey and wildly stabbing is a great way to lose your teeth. Or really, your life. So the Smilodon was actually a grappler. They'd ambush a giant herbivore, use their massive 900-pound bulk to knock it off balance, and then use their reinforced front arms to completely pin the animal to the ground. They had to hold the prey perfectly still. Once the animal was completely pinned, the Smilodon would open its jaw to that horrifying 120-degree angle. Then it would deliver one precise strike to the soft tissue of the prey's throat. These teeth were basically used as surgical blades. One clean slice through the jugular vein and the windpipe, and the prey would bleed out in seconds. No struggling, no hitting bones, no broken teeth. But if their whole strategy relies on delivering one fatal bite to the throat, you'd probably assume they had a bite force strong enough to crush a bowling ball. But here's the weirdest part. A Smilodon's actual bite force was, well, kind of pathetic. In fact, their jaw muscles were only about 1/3 as strong as the modern African lions. If a Smilodon just tried to clamp down on a bone using only its jaw muscles, it wouldn't be able to crush it. But they didn't actually need a strong jaw. Because they had to open their mouths so wide, their jaw muscles were stretched way too thin to actually bite down hard. So instead, the power came from their neck. A Smilodon had massive neck muscles connecting its skull to its shoulders. When it was time to deliver the fatal strike, they didn't just bite down. They used their entire neck to violently thrust their skull downward, driving the teeth into the prey like a pickaxe. The jaw just held the prey in place. The neck did all the actual killing. So we have a 900-pound, bear-like grappler with a weak jaw but a devastating neck thrust. How would this actually hold up against the apex predators we have today? Let's put a 900-pound Smilodon populator up against a 600-pound Siberian tiger. The tiger is built for sprinting, jumping, and agility, and it has a significantly stronger bite force. But in a brawl, speed and bite force don't really matter when your opponent is a 900-pound wall of muscle designed specifically to pin things to the ground. If a tiger tried to fight a Smilodon, the Smilodon would just grab the tiger with its massively thick front arms, use its 300-pound weight advantage to crush the tiger into the dirt, and hold it there. Once the tiger is pinned, it doesn't matter how strong its bite force is, because it can't move. The tiger is basically just stuck in the dirt going, okay, well, this isn't fair. The Smilodon just drops its jaw 120 degrees, delivers one pickaxe thrust to the throat, and the fight is over. So physically, the Smilodon is an absolute tank. But fossils found in the La Bras tar pits revealed something about them that's honestly way more shocking than how big they were. For a long time, scientists assumed that Smilodons were solitary hunters, just like modern tigers or leopards. You live alone, you hunt alone, and if you get hurt, you die alone. But when researchers started looking closely at the thousands of Smilodon bones pulled from the tar pits, they noticed a glaring anomaly. A huge number of these skeletons showed signs of severe trauma. we're talking about shattered pelvises, completely broken legs, and dislocated spines. And honestly, getting injured isn't even the crazy part. These bones showed signs of massive healing. Some of these injuries would have taken months or even years to heal. If a solitary predator breaks its back in the wild, it can't hunt. And if it can't hunt, it's going to die. The bone never gets a chance to heal. The only way Smilodon with a broken back survives for years is if something else is bringing it food. This completely flipped our understanding of the animal. They were actually highly social. They lived in packs, they protected their wounded, and they actively shared food with members of their group who couldn't hunt for themselves. So they were actually highly social pack hunters, which raises a pretty terrifying thought to us. What happened when early humans ran into a pack of these things? Early humans absolutely crossed paths with Smilodons in the Americas, and given that we, and yes, that includes all of you watching Beyond the Green right now, are slow, lack natural armor, and are basically just walking bags of meat, you'd think we were on the menu. But realistically, we were actually terrible prey for them. Remember, a Smilodon is built entirely to grapple giants, pin them down, and avoid hitting bones with their fragile teeth. Humans are small, erratic, and incredibly bony. If a Smilodon tried to bite a human, there's a very high chance that those 11-inch teeth would slam straight into a collarbone or a ribcage and snap right off. We just don't have enough thick neck tissue for them to safely slice into. Plus, humans travel in groups and carry long, pointy sticks. A Smilodon is an ambush predator that relies on getting close and grappling. Trying to grapple a group of screaming apes that are stabbing you from 10 feet away with spears is just a really bad idea. It's a fantastic way to get yourself turned into a rug. So while Smilodon absolutely could kill a human if it wanted to, it almost certainly avoided us whenever possible. We were essentially the exact opposite of what the Smilodon was built to hunt. And unfortunately for them, that specific build is exactly what sealed their fate. Being this good at one specific thing comes with a risk. It evolved to be the absolute best in the world at doing exactly one thing: wrestling giant megafauna to the ground and slicing their throats. And for millions of years, this strategy worked perfectly. They dominated the Americas because there was an endless supply of giant, slow-moving food. But the problem with being this perfectly adapted for one specific diet is that you lose the ability to change. Being a 900-pound grappler with fragile teeth is great for hunting giant sloths, but it's terrible for literally everything else. If the environment stays exactly the same, you rule the world. But if the environment changes and your one specific food source disappears, you're completely helpless. And at the end of the Ice Age, that one thing went away. Around 10,000 years ago, the world began to change rapidly. The climate warmed, the glaciers retreated, and humans began spreading across the Americas, hunting in massive numbers. Because of this, the giant megafauna, the ground sloths, the mammals, the giant bison, started to go extinct. Suddenly, the Smilodon looked around and realized that its entire food supply was just gone. And not just, oh, there's a bit of a food shortage this year. It was gone. The only prey left was smaller, faster animals like deer, antelope, and early horses. And this is where the Smilodon was completely screwed. They couldn't run fast enough to catch a deer. Their bear-like bodies were way too heavy and slow. And even if they managed to ambush one, a deer's neck is incredibly thin and packed with bones. If a Smilodon tried to use its 11-inch teeth on a deer, the teeth would shatter against the cervical vertebrae. They were too slow to catch the prey, and their weapons were too fragile to kill it safely. Their greatest physical advantages became the exact reasons they starved to death. Because they went extinct, people usually look at the saber-tooth tiger as an evolutionary failure. But that's completely missing the point. Saber-tooth predators existed on this planet for tens of millions of years. They survived across multiple continents, adapted to countless environments, and dominated the food chain for an incredibly long time. To put that in perspective, modern humans have only been around for about 300,000 years. We haven't even survived a fraction of the time that the Smilodon did. They were just perfectly adapted to a world that stopped existing. We usually imagine the Smilodon as this indestructible movie monster that just stabbed everything in sight. But the reality, a 900-pound bear-like grappler that carefully sliced throats, lived in highly social packs, cared for its wounded, and ultimately fell victim to a changing climate, is vastly more interesting than the myth. But anyways, thank you guys for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this one. If there's another topic or animal you want to see me cover next, definitely let me know in the comments, because I really do appreciate all your suggestions. And if you want to keep going and see another video like this one, check it out right here.